You know that quiet moment after another conversation that seemed promising? The one where everything felt right while it was happening. You laughed, you connected. Maybe you even thought for a second this might finally be it. And then days pass, the energy fades, the messages slow down, or sometimes nothing dramatic happens at all. No rejection, no argument, no obvious reason. Things just drift away. And eventually, you find yourself staring at your phone, wondering the same quiet question again. Why does this keep happening to me? Not in a bitter way, more like a tired curiosity. Because if you're honest, you've tried. You've shown up, you've been open, you've been patient, and yet somehow love seems to move easily around other people, while with you it feels strangely out of reach. There's a certain kind of person who knows this feeling very well. The person who isn't cold but gets called too independent. The one friends describe as such a catch while quietly wondering why they're still single. Sometimes people assume it's pickiness, bad luck, or just timing. But people who live this experience know something deeper is happening. Because it's not that love never appears, it's that it rarely seems to stay. And when that pattern repeats enough times, a strange kind of doubt begins to grow. The kind that whispers small questions late at night. Is something wrong with me? Most people never talk about this honestly. Instead, they offer simple explanations. You just haven't met the right person yet. You need to put yourself out there more. You're probably choosing the wrong people. Sometimes those things are true, but psychology has discovered something more complicated about people who consistently struggle to find lasting love. There's often a deeper pattern happening under the surface, and it usually has very little to do with attractiveness, personality, or worth. It has to do with how the human nervous system learns to connect. The real topic here isn't simply dating. It's the psychology of people who struggle to find love. And the truth is, this experience is far more common and far more understandable than most people realize. Because love is not just a feeling. It's a biological process. It's something the brain and body learn over time. And the way we experience connection as adults is often shaped by patterns that began much earlier in life. In the 1950s, a psychologist named John Bowlby began studying something called attachment. His work, later expanded by Mary Ainsworth, changed the way psychologists understand relationships. They discovered something surprisingly simple. The human brain learns how to connect with others long before we ever begin dating. It learns through early relationships, through caregivers, through repeated emotional experiences, through moments when we reached out and someone either responded or didn't. And slowly, quietly, the brain begins building a kind of internal map, a map that answers questions we rarely realize we're asking. Is it safe to depend on people? Do people stay when I need them? Am I someone worth choosing? For some people, those answers become stable and reassuring. Connection feels natural. Love feels possible. But for others, the map becomes more complicated. Maybe attention was inconsistent. Maybe affection was unpredictable. Maybe love came with conditions. Or maybe emotions simply weren't talked about much at all. In those environments, the brain adapts, not because something is broken, but because the nervous system is designed to survive uncertainty. And when connection has felt unpredictable in the past, the brain learns to protect itself. Sometimes that protection looks like independence. Sometimes it looks like emotional distance. Sometimes it looks like choosing partners who are just slightly unavailable. Not intentionally, not consciously, but in subtle ways that repeat familiar emotional patterns. Psychologists often refer to this as attachment dynamics. And one of the most surprising discoveries from decades of research is this. People who struggle to find love are often not avoiding connection. They are responding to patterns their nervous system learned long ago, patterns that once made perfect sense. For example, imagine someone who grew up in an environment where emotional needs were rarely acknowledged. Maybe they were taught to be strong,
to handle things alone, to not be too much. Over time, their brain learns something important. Needing people might not be safe. So as adults, they become incredibly capable, self-sufficient, independent. From the outside, they appear confident and stable, but when romantic connection begins to deepen, the nervous system sometimes sends a quiet signal.
Don't rely too much. And that signal can create subtle distance, not because the person doesn't want love, but because the brain has learned that closeness can feel risky. For others, the pattern develops in the opposite direction. Imagine a child who received love inconsistently. Some days there was warmth and attention, other days there was distance or unpredictability. In those situations, the nervous system learns something different. Connection might disappear. So the brain becomes hyper-aware of emotional signals. It scans constantly. Small changes in tone, a delayed reply, a shift in behavior. Things most people barely notice can suddenly feel significant. And when that sensitivity appears in adult relationships, it can create cycles of anxiety and reassurance seeking. Again, not because the person is weak or dramatic, but because the brain is trying to protect connection. These patterns are deeply human, and they're far more common than people realize. But here's where things become interesting, because struggling to find love is not always about attachment styles alone. Sometimes it's also about awareness. People who think deeply about relationships often approach love differently from those who don't. Research in personality psychology shows that highly introspective individuals tend to analyze emotional dynamics more carefully. They notice subtleties, they reflect on meaning, they pay attention to emotional authenticity. And while that depth can create powerful connections, it can also make superficial relationships feel unsatisfying, which means they often walk away from situations others might tolerate. Not because they are impossible to please, but because they are quietly searching for something real. This creates an unusual paradox. The very qualities that make someone capable of deep love can sometimes make it harder to find, because depth requires compatibility, and true compatibility is rare. Another layer of this psychology comes from something called emotional bandwidth. The human brain has limited capacity for emotional risk. If someone has experienced repeated disappointments in relationships, their nervous system begins adjusting expectations, not dramatically, just subtly. It becomes slightly more cautious, slightly more observant, sometimes slightly slower to trust. From the outside, this can look like hesitation, but internally, it's simply a form of emotional self-preservation. And here's something that often surprises people. There is no correct way to approach love. Some people are naturally open and expressive. Others move slowly and carefully. Some attach easily. Others take time. None of these patterns are inherently better. They are simply different ways human nervous systems learn to navigate connection. But the social world doesn't always recognize this complexity. Instead, it creates simplified narratives. If someone is single for a long time, people assume something must be wrong. Sometimes, people who struggle to find love are simply those whose nervous systems value depth over immediacy. People who sense emotional safety before they allow closeness. People who notice subtle incompatibilities early on. People who require a level of mutual understanding that takes time to appear. And while that approach can slow the process of finding love, it can also protect against relationships that would eventually feel empty. There's also another psychological factor rarely discussed. Many people who struggle to find love are deeply self-aware, and self-awareness changes the way relationships feel. When someone is highly conscious of their emotions, their patterns, and their personal history, they often approach connection with more reflection than impulsivity. They think about compatibility, about emotional dynamics, about long-term alignment, while others may simply follow attraction and hope for the best. Neither approach is superior, but they lead to very different experiences. For someone who reflects deeply, love isn't just chemistry, it's also emotional safety, mutual understanding, shared values. That kind of connection can be incredibly fulfilling, but it can also take longer to find. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more interesting videos.